The harsh dawn of survival. The sun rose over the wide African savanna, spilling golden light across a land that was both beautiful and merciless. 20,000 years ago, this was not the Africa we know today. Much of the world was still locked in the grip of the Ice Age. Though Africa did not freeze as Europe did, its landscapes were wild, unpredictable, and punishing. Rain fell rarely, rivers dried without warning, and food sources could vanish in a matter of weeks. For the small groups of early humans scattered across the land, survival was a daily gamble against hunger, thirst, and predators. Scarcity of food and water. Each morning began with the same question: where will we find food? Unlike modern life, where meals come from farms and markets, these people lived entirely by what they could gather, hunt, or scavenge. Women and children often left camp at dawn, moving silently through tall grass to collect roots, berries, seeds, and nuts. They had learned to read the land like a book: which plants were edible, which berries were poisonous, and which roots held precious moisture inside them. Their survival depended on this knowledge, passed down from mothers to daughters for countless generations. Men and older boys prepared for the hunt. The tools they carried were simple yet effective: sharpened stone blades, fire-hardened spears, and bows strung with sinew. Hunting was dangerous, for the prey they sought, wildebeest, gazelles, and even the occasional buffalo, were fast, strong, and often protected by herds. To bring one down required patience, teamwork, and great courage. But even if hunters returned empty-handed, nothing went to waste. The people were opportunists. If they found a predator's abandoned kill, they would cut away the remaining meat with stone knives. If insects swarmed over rotting carcasses, the larvae became food. Protein was life, and in the harsh African landscapes, life could not be wasted. Water was harder to secure. Rivers and lakes were often guarded by crocodiles or shrinking under the burning sun. Families sometimes walked for miles, following dry streambeds until they reached hidden springs or dug holes into the ground where moisture still lingered. Every sip mattered. In years of drought, tribes were forced to abandon familiar lands and trek across deserts in search of flowing water. Dangers from predators. Survival was not only a battle against hunger and thirst, but also against the teeth and claws of the wild. Africa 20,000 years ago was filled with predators. Lions roamed in large prides, hyenas prowled the night, and leopards lurked silently in the trees. Even more dangerous were the giant beasts long extinct today: saber-toothed cats, towering elephants, and packs of wild dogs larger and fiercer than those of today. For humans, who lacked fur, fangs, and claws, the night was the most terrifying enemy of all. Darkness meant vulnerability. Around the fire, families huddled close, keeping the flames alive as a shield against predators. The crackle of wood was more than warmth, it was protection. Without fire, the night belonged to beasts. Children were taught from the earliest age to stay close to the group, to remain silent when danger approached, and to recognize animal tracks in the dirt. Every footprint in the soil was a warning. A fresh lion print near the waterhole could mean death for the careless. Climate's unforgiving grip. The African landscapes of 20,000 years ago were harshly divided between wet and dry seasons. During the wet months, grasslands flourished, animals multiplied, and water flowed freely. But when the rains stopped, rivers shrank into cracked earth, and the once green plains turned to dust. Herds of antelope and zebra migrated far away, leaving behind silence and emptiness. Humans had to follow them or starve. This constant movement was exhausting, but necessary. Families carried what little they owned: stone tools, woven baskets, fire-making kits, and animal skins. Shelters of branches and grass were built quickly and abandoned just as quickly. Nothing was permanent. Life was a cycle of moving, surviving, and moving again. The Ice Age made conditions even more unpredictable. Global climate shifts brought years of harsher droughts followed by sudden floods. Storms swept across the land, sometimes washing away entire camps. For humans, the environment was not just a backdrop, it was an adversary. Only those who adapted, who read the sky and the soil, could endure. The strength of small communities. In this world, no one survived alone. A single human, no matter how skilled, was too weak against predators, too slow to chase prey, and too vulnerable to illness or injury. Strength came from the group. Most communities numbered only 20 to 30 individuals, families bound by blood and trust. Each person had a role, hunters, gatherers, toolmakers, firekeepers, and storytellers. Cooperation was the secret weapon of humanity. While lions hunted with claws, humans hunted with strategy. They worked together to drive animals toward traps or ambushes. They shared food, cared for the sick, and raised children collectively. In the silence of the night, when predators prowled beyond the firelight, the presence of the group gave courage. It was this bond of cooperation that separated humans from other animals. Alone, they were weak. Together, they could endure. The endless struggle. Every day was a test. Sometimes the hunt succeeded, and bellies were full. Other times, hunger gnawed at the tribe for days. Children cried from thirst, and elders weakened from exhaustion. Death was always near, through injury, disease, or starvation. Yet somehow, against all odds, these people endured. They endured because they learned. They endured because they shared knowledge and worked as one. They endured because their will to survive was stronger than the hardships of the land. In the heart of Africa 20,000 years ago, survival was never guaranteed. But it was here, in these harsh landscapes, that the roots of human resilience were forged, a resilience that would carry humanity through centuries of struggle and into the future. Tools, migration, and the bonds of survival. The days of early humans in Africa were ruled by necessity, but they were not only survivors, they were innovators. The harsh landscapes demanded more than strength or endurance. To endure droughts, hunt elusive prey, and travel long distances, they needed to sharpen their minds as much as their tools. And so, out of struggle came ingenuity. The evolution of tools. At the center of survival was the tool. By 20,000 years ago, stone tools had reached remarkable sophistication. A sharp-edged flake could skin an antelope, carve wood, or scrape hides into clothing. Spears tipped with finely chipped stone allowed hunters to wound prey from a safer distance. Small bone needles stitched together animal skins, turning them into cloaks and coverings that offered protection against cold nights. Fire, too, was a tool, arguably the greatest of all. It was carefully guarded, for starting it from scratch was difficult. Tribes often carried glowing embers wrapped in bark or dried moss when they moved, ensuring the flame never died. Fire hardened spear tips, cooked meat for easier digestion, and made bitter roots edible. More importantly, it gave courage. Without fire, humans were prey. With fire, they became masters of the night. Over time, these people learned to shape tools not only for survival but also for efficiency. The bow and arrow, which appeared in Africa during this period, was a revolution. It allowed hunters to strike silently from afar, changing the balance between man and beast. With each innovation, humans tilted the scales of survival more in their favor. Migration across harsh landscapes. Tools were not enough on their own. Africa's climates forced constant movement. When drought struck, rivers vanished and grazing animals migrated in search of greener lands. Humans had no choice but to follow. Migration was not a journey of days, but of seasons and sometimes years. Families carried their world on their backs, traveling across savannas, deserts, and forests. The journeys were perilous. Crossing open plains exposed them to predators. Moving through deserts tested their endurance, with thirst gnawing at their throats and the sun burning their skin. Children were carried on shoulders, while elders walked with steady determination, passing down knowledge of paths, landmarks, and hidden waterholes. These migrations were not aimless. Early humans were guided by memory and by instinct. They followed the tracks of animals, the patterns of birds, and the rhythms of the seasons. In this way, knowledge was as valuable as any weapon. A remembered cave could mean shelter. A remembered tree could mark the location of a hidden spring. Without this inherited wisdom, migration would be death. Yet migration was more than survival. It shaped culture. Every movement brought contact with new landscapes, new challenges, and sometimes even new groups of people. Occasionally, encounters turned violent, as groups competed for scarce resources. But often, they exchanged knowledge, tools, and even family members through marriage, weaving networks of connection across the vast continent. The role of cooperation and bonds. In this world of scarcity, selfishness was a path to ruin. Survival was collective, built on bonds of trust. Food was shared, for hoarding it weakened the group. The strong carried the weak, and the skilled taught the unskilled. Every person mattered. Hunters relied on teamwork. Some acted as decoys, flushing prey toward hidden ambushers. Others encircled herds, working together to isolate a single animal. Even children had roles, scaring birds into flight or helping gather stones for traps. The hunt was never an individual triumph, it was a community's achievement. At night, after the day's struggles, these bonds deepened around the fire. There, stories were told, tales of past hunts, of ancestors, of spirits that guarded the land. These stories were more than entertainment. They carried lessons, warnings, and shared values. Through them, memory became culture, and culture became strength. The bonds of family were equally vital. Children were raised not just by parents but by entire groups. An orphan child was not left behind but folded into the tribe's care. Elders, though less able to hunt, were treasured for their wisdom. Their memories of old waterholes, of seasonal migrations, and of ancient dangers often meant the difference between life and death. The challenge of other humans. The landscape was dangerous, but sometimes the most difficult challenge came not from predators or hunger, but from other human groups. Africa, even 20,000 years ago, was home to many different bands of people. Competition for fertile land, rich hunting grounds, and precious water often led to conflict. These clashes were brutal, fought with spears and stones, but they were also costly. Most groups preferred avoidance over violence. The risk of losing hunters or foragers was too great. Instead, humans developed strategies to mark territories, signal warnings, and sometimes negotiate peace through trade or intermarriage. Cooperation between groups could bring advantages, sharing tools, fire, or knowledge of animal migrations. In this way, humanity learned that survival was not only about overcoming the land, but also about managing relationships with one another. Ingenuity in shelter and adaptation. As families moved, they built temporary shelters from what the land provided. In the open savanna, huts of grass and branches offered shade from the sun. In forests, lean-tos of leaves and wood gave cover from rain. Near cliffs or caves, rock provided the strongest protection, shielding families from wind and predators. These shelters were never permanent, but they reflected human adaptability. Wherever they went, people transformed the environment into a home. They learned to use animal skins as blankets, to weave baskets from reeds, to store dried meat and seeds for lean times. Every adaptation was a response to necessity, and every necessity made them stronger. The quiet triumph of survival. Migration, cooperation, and innovation were not glorious. They were exhausting, dangerous, and relentless. Yet through these daily acts of resilience, humans endured. Each successful hunt, each safe crossing of a desert, each night spent under firelight was a quiet triumph. The harsh African landscapes tested them at every turn, but in overcoming these challenges, humans honed the qualities that would one day shape civilizations: intelligence, adaptability, and unity. The story of survival was not just about living from one day to the next, it was about building the foundation of humanity's future. Spirit, resilience, and the legacy of survival. As night settled over the African plains, the stars emerged in a sky untouched by cities or smoke. The Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of fire, a reminder to early humans that the world was vast and full of mysteries. For these small bands of people, survival was not only physical, it was also spiritual. The harshness of their lives demanded strength of spirit as much as strength of body. The world of belief. Around the fire, stories flowed like the sparks that drifted into the night. These were not idle tales, but sacred lessons. Elders spoke of spirits in the rivers, of ancestors who watched from the stars, and of animals that carried wisdom and warnings. For the hunter who stalked antelope, the chase was more than hunger, it was a ritual. Before hunts, some tribes painted their bodies with ochre, whispering prayers for success. The death of an animal was honored, for its sacrifice meant life for the people. Nothing was wasted, meat was eaten, hides became clothing, bones were carved into tools, and sinew into cord. To waste was to insult the spirit of the animal, and perhaps invite misfortune. These beliefs gave meaning to struggle. When children asked why the rains did not come or why predators prowled, the stories offered answers. They gave hope in times of famine and courage when facing danger. Faith, in many forms, was as important as fire. It gave the people strength when their bodies faltered. Rituals of life and death. Life was fragile. A wound could fester, a drought could starve, and childbirth carried great risks. Yet even in the face of death, early humans found ways to honor the departed. Graves were dug in soft earth or bodies laid within caves. Sometimes, the dead were buried with tools, beads, or food, as though to prepare them for a journey beyond life. These rituals reveal more than fear of death. They reveal love, memory, and the human need to care even when survival was at stake. A people who could pause in their struggle to mourn showed resilience of a different kind, the resilience of spirit. Resilience in the face of hardship. Drought stretched on for years, reducing rivers to cracked basins and leaving herds of animals thin and scattered. Yet still, humans endured. They adapted their diets, grinding seeds into flour, roasting insects, and boiling bitter roots until they were safe to eat. They stored water in hollowed gourds, learned to dig deeper into the earth for hidden springs, and even followed elephants, knowing that these great beasts could lead them to waterholes. When predators grew bold, humans became bolder. They learned to defend their camps with rings of fire, to sharpen their spears harder, and to hunt in larger groups. They listened to the cries of birds and the movement of herds, reading the land like a living language. Every hardship carved new skills into their memory, skills that were passed down to each new generation. It was this constant adaptation that ensured their survival. No single drought, no single predator, no single disaster could erase humanity, because humanity's strength was never in one person. It was in the group, in knowledge, and in the will to keep moving forward. Seeds of the future. Though these people could not know it, their survival laid the foundation for all that would follow. By enduring in Africa's harshest landscapes, they kept alive the flame of humanity itself. Over thousands of years, some groups would migrate beyond Africa, carrying with them tools, stories, and resilience. Others would remain, continuing to shape the land and be shaped by it. The survival strategies of these people, sharing food, working together, adapting to new challenges, would later form the roots of civilization. The tools they sharpened became the ancestors of plows and knives. The stories told by firelight became the ancestors of myths and religions. The shelters of grass and stone became the ancestors of villages, towns, and cities. A night on the plains. Imagine one such night. A small band of humans gathers in a circle around a flickering fire. The air is cool, the cries of hyenas echo in the distance, and sparks rise into the starlit sky. A child leans against her mother, listening as an elder tells of a great lion spirit who teaches hunters courage. The men sharpen their spears, preparing for tomorrow's hunt. Women tend to baskets of gathered roots and seeds, while others patch skins into cloaks. The fire crackles, a fragile bubble of safety in the vast wilderness. Beyond the light, darkness presses close, filled with unseen dangers. Yet within the circle, there is warmth, unity, and resilience. They do not know if tomorrow will bring rain or drought, feast or hunger, safety or danger. But they know this, together, they will endure. The legacy of resilience. 20,000 years ago, survival was a daily struggle. Yet from that struggle emerged the qualities that still define humanity today: intelligence, adaptability, cooperation, and faith in something greater than themselves. They were not rulers of the land, but survivors within it, fragile, vulnerable, and yet unbroken. The African landscapes tested them endlessly, but instead of breaking, they forged resilience as strong as stone. The story of their survival is not only the story of the past. It is the foundation of the present. Every human alive today carries within them the legacy of those who sat by ancient fires, who hunted under the burning sun, who mourned their dead and told stories to give hope. They survived not because the land was kind, but because they learned to endure its cruelty. And in that endurance, they ensured that the story of humanity would continue.